Welcome to the seventh episode of the Douglas Social Credit Podcast. I'm Dr. Oliver Heydorn, and I'm joined once again by my colleague William Waite. And today we are going to be talking about an issue that has perplexed us for a number of, years really, which is why is it that something as relevant, as important, as valuable as Douglas Social Credit, the financial analysis and proposals, the economic analysis and proposals, the political analysis and proposals, why is it that something that portends great benefit for humanity uh, has been sort of isolated and it's proven to be very difficult to get other people to take any notice of it. We're sort of in a bit of a bubble, and has proven to be very difficult to break out of that bubble and to get any kind of traction in the wider world, even among people who you would think are used to thinking outside of the box, are used to thinking in alternative terms. Even they seem to have great difficulty in coming to terms with Douglas Social Credit. So we have a number of, I suppose, speculations or theories as to why this might be happening. And if we can diagnose the problem correctly, then perhaps we can come up with a proposal for resolving it, action steps that we can take to finally, hopefully, communicate this message that we have to communicate, because it involves everyone. It would benefit everyone. And if we are not successful in communicating this message, you can see the trajectory that we're on in the Western world, particularly, but in the whole world, that the situation is not sustainable. It's not economically sustainable. It's not financially sustainable. It's not culturally sustainable. It's not environmentally sustainable. Douglas Social Credit has the answers. We're convinced of that. And we would like to have a hearing. We would like for it to be put on the table for public discussion. But we're having difficulty, and have had difficulty for many, many years when it comes to gaining any kind of traction. So why might this be? So maybe you can start off with a suggestion as to why this is happening and what we
Yes.
can do to stop it.
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons why this is. One of the things that you've spoken about a bit is this, there's a barrier to entry in terms of, on the face of it, it appears quite complex. You're dealing with the economic system, with the financial system, with the money system, which does have a degree of complexity about it, and want us to try at least at the start quite hard in
Mm-hmm.
order to understand what Douglas was on about.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing which contributes to this difficulty in initial understanding, I think, is that it's very different. Like if you've been engaged with economics or politics of the conventional type,
Yep.
it's very different from anything that you'll have come across before.
Yeah.
So, it might, the solutions which are offered, the analysis which is offered, the things which are given emphasis
Mm-hmm.
in the Douglas social credit conception are so far outside what the conventional story is that you might have trouble sort of connecting the dots. So I think I don't want to put you off by saying that it's very, very complex and impossible to understand. It is not that at all,
Mm-hmm.
but it does come out of left field, and it is dealing with economics and finance, which is just unfamiliar territory for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can assure you that looking into the Douglas social credits analysis is very rewarding, however, because I think without it, it is impossible to explain what is going on. If you leave finance, if you leave consideration of financial aspects out of your analysis of what's going on in the world, you
Mm-hmm.
cannot properly understand it. Because as we've said a few times before, finance is the one ring to rule them all. It's where the power comes from. And if you really want to understand the roots of our problems, You have to understand from where the power comes, and
Yeah.
it's essentially financial. At different periods in history, it's been different things.
Mm.
It's been the power of the military, it's been the power of the clergy. Well, in our day and age, it's the power of money.
Hmm.
And if you don't understand the motives behind people who control money, then you can't bring this thing together. So I think that's a good starting point at least
Yes,
as
yeah.
to
And this
why
is, you've
it's
highlighted one,
difficult to.
yeah, you've highlighted one of my frustrations in that you'll see people on social media, some of them well-known commentators or alternative mainstream alternative journalists, and they'll be concerned about let's say migration, mass migration, or they'll be concerned about uh, climate change propaganda and smart cities, or they'll be concerned about constant, the inflation, let's say the constant inflation that's going on. Whatever their pet issue is, they'll say, isn't this terrible? And, this is being used to centralize power further. I mean, they may not express it in those terms, but that is basically what they're saying, that all these things are being used against us to make us slaves or worse. And yet they don't see the role that the financial system and the benefits that accrue to those who own and operate the financial system. They don't see the role that those things play in driving all of these terrible, destructive policies. Right. So this sort of underscores or underlines the importance of us finding a way to communicate the Douglas social credit vision. I do think you're right in that it does require out of the box thinking, and not just on one point, but on several points. So very often we might, talk about, let's say, the national dividend, and people who don't know anything about Douglas social credit say, "Oh, that's just a UBI." And well, because
Hmm.
they're trying to understand it, the unknown on the basis of what they know. And the reality is it's not a UBI, right? It's not a conventional UBI in any sense, because the financing is completely different, right? There's no redistributive taxation, there's no increasing the public debt. It is financed solely through the Douglas social credit monetary reform. And it's not a fixed amount. It depends on what the economy can support, how big the gap is, and that can change through time. So it's got certain similarities to a conventional UBI, but it's also got very important differences. And so, um, but people, they want to simplify things because they only have so much bandwidth. And this means then that the scope for misinterpretation is very large, right? You say, oh, national dividend, well, that's just a UBI. It's like, well, it's not. You have to go deeper.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Yeah, I think also that we've been conditioned not to look for solutions in this area of our organisation.
Hmm.
Is another thing I would say. Like there is some. People have a sense of inevitability about the money system or about finance. It's like it's
Hmm.
just it's just sort of a um, neutral representation of the facts.
Yeah.
And that if interest rates go up or down, or there's a recession or whatever, then it can't possibly be finance that's contributed to it. It's the market that's done it, or some action in the
Right.
market. So people aren't kind of primed to look for solutions there.
Right. So they don't
Um,
understand that the financial system that we've got, because it's not a structurally honest system, because it's not fit for purpose, right? If the purpose of the economy, if its true purpose is to deliver the goods and services that we all need to survive and flourish, and to do that with the least amount of labor and the least amount of resource consumption, the present financial system is not fit for purpose. Uh,
hmm,
but if the purpose of the economy is to centralize wealth, power, and privilege in the hands of an oligarchic elite, while artificially limiting and distorting the economic activities of everyone else who's lower down in the economic pyramid, and thereby damaging the common good, well, then it is fit for purpose, right? So this
Yes.
whole the
Yeah.
whole policy dimension in finance is lost on them, and they like you're saying, they just think that maybe because it involves numbers, they think it's all objective, it's just a veneer, it's just reflecting reality. But what we're saying is that because of the way it's structured, it doesn't reflect reality, and therefore every time we
Yes.
try to interact with the real economy on the basis of a lens that is distorting, we're not getting accurate information, and we end up making decisions that are not optimally satisfactory. And actually, it's like we're hobbling along trying to make the system work, but it's always giving us inaccurate data.
I guess then that raises the question as to who is it supposed to work for?
Hmm.
I mean, it does get optimal results for a minority, that's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't really work for the prosperity of the individual or the freedom of the individual, which I suppose their propaganda would say that this is what we're trying to achieve. But in effect, it doesn't achieve that. It achieves quite the opposite. I mean, if you look at the issue of an economy that delivers goods and services with the least resource use and labor,
Hmm.
well, it's never professed to do that in my lifetime anyway. It's what it's trying to do is create full employment, for instance.
Yeah. At least
That
as far as the
the
labs are
people
concerned.
want money, but they misdirect the call for money
Yeah,
and say, oh well, we need to provide employment.
yeah, yeah. Even though there's
So,
actually no
in some
physical.
sense, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do.
Yeah,
And if we want to change what it's doing, then we've got to change the design
yeah.
so that it can be organized for the common good rather than the wealth and power of a privileged minority.
That's right. Yeah. So that's another interesting thing there that we've just brought up, the whole sort of full employment versus the social credit alternative, which would be a policy of the minimum employment necessary. That if we can, economics is supposed to be about efficiency, getting the most for the least. So if we can fulfill the economic task, the economic function in society with only, let's say, 25% of the available labor force actually working, we don't require the remaining 75%, then we maintain that that's what it should be. And that economics
Mm.
should cease to be like the be all and end all in defining uh, purpose of human life. But when you say things like this, people can't, they have difficulty. It's so far out of their experience and so far out of common political discourse, where politicians are always talking about, oh, we have to create jobs. I created more jobs than the next guy, vote for me, all this sort of thing. That
Mm.
it's too much of a leap, and yet it should be just basic common sense. Why insist on everybody going to work when 75% of the people now working are involved in useless, witless, redundant, or destructive employment merely to get an income, because otherwise they don't have access to goods and services. It's insanity, and from that insanity, you can only generate more insanity. Is this what people want? It doesn't make any sense.
Well, I mean, there's a whole heap of activities which people should be attending to, which they can't as a result of this. Like they say there's a crisis amongst the youth. Well, a lot of this is traceable to like parental neglect. And I know parental neglect happens for a lot of reasons, but it definitely happens because both parents now have to work
Hmm.
in order to be able to afford a house.
Yeah,
And this was not so, even a few decades ago.
right.
And then we're supposed to believe that that's progress and good economic management. And when people can't even afford to look after their own children.
Hmm. Yeah, this is astonishing. I mean, this is one of the things that should raise eyebrows everywhere, in that technology has progressed massively since the 1950s, and yet for many people it is harder to make ends meet now. It's harder to have a middle-class lifestyle than it was so many decades ago on one income. So how is that progress? If the financial system reflected reality, seeing that physically it's easier now on a physical level, it is or could be easier for us to provide ourselves with everything we need, easier now than ever before in human history. And yet the financial system, because it's a distorting lens, it reads that physical progress as if it was a physical degradation. It actually inverts the reality. And now, I don't know what the actual ratios are, but it used to be something like a person's salary was maybe 1/4 in a year was, 1/4 of the cost of a house. And now maybe it's 1/7 or 1/8 or 1/9 or whatever. This is progress. If the financial system reflected reality, houses should be even more affordable now than they were relative to salaries in the 1950s.
That's right. That's right. And yeah, and you can apply that across the board. I mean, I was reading the other day that 600 years ago there were 90 statutory holidays in England,
Yeah,
and we're called, they want us to, we're called the labour saving age.
yeah,
Where's the labour saving? Everyone's sitting in traffic jams, clogging up the cities, going to their bullshit jobs in office, in offices, shuffling paper around,
yeah,
pretending they're busy, and just building up resentment, and it's affecting their relationships at home.
mm,
It's a disastrous situation.
yeah, yeah.
We've kind of got off the topic though, haven't we? Which is
Well,
okay.
it's relevant. It's relevant. But yeah, if we bring ourselves back to the sort of the focus of why it's so difficult to communicate the Douglas social credit message, I do think that a lot of people, I suppose, they're used to outsourcing their thinking to experts, and
Mm.
they're used to outsourcing thinking to the establishment. So they'll say, well, the banking system is there, the financial system is there, the government is there. It's their job to run it, and so we just trust them. And why should I have to learn about all these things? I've got my own stuff that I focus on.
Sure.
And I suppose the answer to that is, well, it affects everybody. Everyone, we are all dependent on finance, on the financial system. So everyone should take an interest. It doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has to be an expert, but because it's something
No.
that none of us are completely isolated from, none of us can be isolated from. We're all, it's the environment in which we move and live and have our being. If you're interested in your own affairs, you should be interested in this because it affects you directly and indirectly in
Yes.
101 different ways.
And I suppose, like what we were saying before about people being so busy now, like when it all boils down, that's a big part of why we have this thing. It's
Mm-hmm.
because people are stuck in their rut. They can't see any way out of it. It's very time consuming. It's exhausting.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably you know, slightly or majorly distressing to actually, try and come to grips with what your real situation is. And it's just easier not to,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like, and then there's the old, well, okay, but what are you going to do about it anyway?
Right. Right.
Can you change it? Is there anything you can
Yeah.
do about it?
And I'm convinced that, you know, if people knew, if people understood, if it was common knowledge, if the basics of Douglas social credit was common knowledge, that alone would have to force policy readjustments because once you see certain things, once you recognize certain realities, you can't
Yes.
unsee them, you know. And it wouldn't even take every single person. If there just was a significant minority in a society, 5%, who understood these things well, things would have to change by
Hmm.
necessity, right? I mean, we would be
I
put on.
think you're right about that.
Yeah.
I wonder how it would work. Like, would it be placards in the streets, and like, I wonder what the mechanism for change would be if you had a sufficient mass of people who understood this. I tend to feel like that is correct.
Hmm.
Like it is so uh, it's so frustrating, or it makes me angry sometimes
Mm.
to reflect on the situation that we're in, and that it's not necessary to be in this situation.
No.
It's not necessary for all this financial hardship and all this incessant waste of people's time and waste of resources and waste of energy. None of that is necessary. And I feel like if people understood how unnecessary it was, it would have to change. But then I get to a point, well, what's the lever for change?
Hmm.
Like they used to drag the moneylender out and hang him in the public square. That would work. I don't know that that's what we want. I'm not saying that's what we want, but I wonder what the instrument would be.
Yeah.
The gallows is fine.
Neither of us is advocating violence of any kind.
No,
We're
exactly.
we're peaceful, we're pacifist. Yes. Um, yes, and that's the whole thing. That's why it's so critical that we find a way forward to try to communicate that. I've attempted the animation series, the idea behind that being that if you show people pictures in conjunction with a narrative text, it will be easier for them to understand, get the gist of what we're saying. And in fact, I have had people say to me that it's easier to understand than your books, which is good. So that's moving in the right direction.
I
But
think that reading is limited. It'll reach a limited audience.
yes, yeah.
Mm.
I have also been told, though, that the animated series is a bit too advanced, perhaps for most people. That we're starting at, level 4, 5, or 6 when we need to start at level 1. And maybe okay, but it's the thing about Douglas social credit too, and this is another reason why it's difficult to communicate, is that you can't really simplify. I don't think anyway. I've yet to see it. I don't know that you can simplify it without distorting it, because it is sort of an integral whole, right? It all the different parts, moving parts in it, they all connect, and the sum is greater than its parts. It's a gestalt. So it's very difficult to take an isolated aspect of it and say, well, this is what it's about, because you're not getting all the other parts that organically sort of fit in with it. So you're not getting the whole thing. You're just getting an isolated
Mm.
aspect. And so how do you simplify it when it's its own universe, it's its own world? You see? So I think this is
Mm.
another thing that
Well, I think people have
make the jump.
become people have become used to simple answers. That's what they expect. And if you can't, and I felt this a lot. If someone asks me what it is or what you're doing, well, what do I have, 5 minutes here? Or because I feel like I can't do it in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, um, I think that and look, the non-conventional response, which Douglas social credit is definitely is, it lacks concision. Like, there are going to be people who um, have a lot of questions, and if you don't have time to deal with those questions properly and go through it properly, the as you say, they won't get the full coherent picture.
Right.
It'll become a caricature of what it is, and that's how they've the powers that be, I guess, have discredited it in the past.
Yes.
This is some funny money system, or some system of financial reform which has been discredited. Well, it's not just about the money system. That's not the entirety of the social credit thing. It has an underlying philosophy on which those reforms are based.
That's right.
And it's sort of like you have to understand and even agree with the philosophical underpinnings if you to understand the what the financial reforms are trying to do.
Hmm.
The philosophical underpinnings essentially being, um, the freedom of the individual,
Hmm. Hmm.
if you can put it in a sentence or a
Yeah,
few
the
words.
whole philosophical basis is that the group exists to serve the individual, not the theoretical individual or this or that individual, but every individual, that people should be satisfied with their financial, economic, political associations. in order to have a stable, successful society. And if they're not satisfied with them, then something's wrong somewhere. Something's not properly designed. Something's not functioning the way it should be.
Mm.
Uh, so, I mean, that's the basis of the social credit message, that there's when things work well, then we're doing something right. And if things aren't working well, well, there's a problem somewhere. Right? And that's just the
One of
nature
the
of
memes, I think you must have posted it this week, said that it was a Douglas quote that said something like, the will of the individual should, to the greatest extent possible, the will of the individual should prevail over his own affairs,
Yes. Yes, that's right.
which I thought was quite a neat summary of the philosophical position.
And I don't see why anyone would object to that. I mean, you have all these principles, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Uh, you know, why would anyone find that objectionable? The only people that would object to it are those who wish to usurp the increment of association so that they can dominate at the expense of others, because they're not satisfied
Mm.
with living within the bounds. They have to go beyond the bounds, as it were, and dominate, exploit, control, whatever. And they do themselves a great deal of harm, and they also do the wider society a great deal of harm. So
Mm.
ultimately, no one benefits from that in any sustainable or meaningful sense. Yeah. So just to
Mm.
bring things to a close here, uh, if any of our viewers have any suggestions, please feel free to comment, because this is a live issue that we are trying in various ways um, to deal with and to process and to overcome. And that's also why we did the memes. This is another attempt to sort of communicate the Douglas social credit vision to get people interested in Douglas social credit. But there are many other things, of course, that could be tried. So if anyone has any suggestions, we are all ears. And William, did you
Mm.
want to end on a positive, optimistic note?
Look, uh, we really are trying to get some oxygen for this thing, and I don't want other social creditors to despair. We're certainly not despairing. Um, I think our objective is just to make contact as much as possible with the thinking and concerned public, and to get this Douglas social credit message spread as widely as possible. We've got and who knows what can come from that.
That's right.
Like, you just don't know where that's going to go. Um, we have websites, socred.org, peoplescredit.com.au. There's heaps of resources there. We'll have those memes put up on peoplescredit.com.au shortly, and the public can share them on their own social media pages. The same with Oliver's animations, and there's heaps of books and reading material there. I mean, I think we're at the point now where we've got, like, we're coming to having enough resources. We're always making more because that's what we do. Um, but we're really keen on engagement with the community, and for everyone who understands and agrees with what we're doing, to spread the word around.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Sounds good. So please like and subscribe, and we will join you in the future for another episode of the Douglas Social Credit Podcast. Thanks for viewing.
You know.